Build your better breakfast at Subway with the tasty 250 combo, a 16-ounce cup of freshly brewed Seattle's best coffee, and any delicious egg muffin melt. And don't hit the snooze on this deal. Right now, come in before 11 a.m. for a $5 foot-long breakfast sub. Subway, eat fresh. The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
this is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
It might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report, taping this on a Tuesday, running Wednesday. On the phone, our old friend, former GM of the Suns, now a TNT guy. Back at TNT, his old home, on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline. Steve Kerr, what's happening?
Hey, Bill, how are you?
How are you? What's it like to be involved in this NBA season but not have a team that you're running?
It's very relaxing, I can tell you that. Sleeping a lot better than I did the last few years. But it's a great job. It's fun. You know, I love the people I'm working with, and I do miss the wins. You know, I miss the juice of having a team and collaborating with coaches and players and all that stuff. But I don't miss the losses. Right. I can tell you that.
Are the Suns to you? They're like an old girlfriend. You were in love with once upon a time. You still have feelings for her. You watch them. You can feel those old pangs.
But we're still friends.
But you still get a look.
That's the key. We're still friends. I watch them every night, and I developed some really strong bonds, particularly with Alvin and the coaching staff and Steve and Grant and Channing and all those guys. I mean, it's you can't not feel something when you've been together like that. You're right. It's a perfect analogy. So it's old girlfriend, but it was a good breakup. So no hard feelings.
I didn't think we'd start with the Suns, but we might as well, because I do think, if they end up being a 500 team, right now they're 8-9. They did have a little bit of a tough schedule, but at some point Nash is going to have to take a step back and say, am I really going to end my career here and never even have one more chance to make the finals? Where do you see his head at with that?
Well, the thing with Steve is that he's always 100% committed to his teammates, and that's what he's all about, is the energy around the team and the commitment and the camaraderie. That's why the 2 years ago when we didn't make the playoffs was really tough on him. But if you remember, during that year, I mean, it was a total disaster. We made the coaching change midway through, and Steve never let up. And when Alvin took over, we actually made a great push at the end of the year and almost snuck into the playoffs. So even in the worst of times, I mean, he's going to suck it up and continue to play his game and rally the troops. And so I don't think that's going to change at all, regardless of what happens.
All right, let's say you're still running the Suns, and you guys are, 22 and 26 in February, and Orlando comes to you and says, we'll give you Jameer Nelson, we'll give you Vince Carter's expiring contract, and we'll give you Brandon Bass, and you give us Nash, Jason Richardson, and we'll take Hedo's contract off your hands. Do you think about it?
No way. Not a chance.
No.
No, I wouldn't do it. I mean, the only way I think you can trade Nash is if you get a big-time future cornerstone that you can build around. And, it's a little bit like, when Seattle traded Ray Allen to Boston, they knew exactly what they were getting. They got the 5th pick. They had their eye on Jeff Green. They felt like Jeff was going to be a cornerstone, and I think he is. He's obviously the third guy there, but they knew exactly what they were getting, and it was a future piece, and it was cap relief, and they had a plan, and it worked out great. Obviously, they've drafted well since and done a great job, but the point being, you can't just settle for kind of
cap
nice
relief
players.
Yeah.
You have to get something tangible that's going to help you build for the future, because in the meantime, people aren't going to go to the games. I mean, the reason people go is to watch Steve Nash play, and if he's gone, then where are you?
But on devil's advocate point, if you're going to trade Steve Nash, don't you want to do it during the season after you've already sold all your tickets?
Yeah, but you better get something back that you can bank on renewals for next year,
But he is 37 years old. I mean, Stockton played till he's 40, but his effectiveness definitely dropped a little bit. How many more years do you think Nash has at an elite level, realistically?
Well, he's unlike any other athlete I've ever seen in his preparation and in his maintenance of his body. I mean, what he's doing right now has never been done before. I mean, Stockton was good when he was 37, 38, but he wasn't nearly as good as Nash is right now. I mean, there hasn't been a noticeable drop in his play, and it's amazing given all the mileage on his legs. And I mean, think about 6 years ago when the Suns signed him. Everybody said, "Oh, that's a horrible contract. He'll never play it out. He'll never make it through." Well, this is now year 7 after the extension, and he's still playing at an incredibly high level. So just the way he handles himself and takes care of his body, I mean, I think he's got several good years left in him. I really do.
This brings us to the magical Phoenix training staff, which might end up being one of the big scandals of all time eventually when it comes out, all the stuff that they did. But in all seriousness, if there's a team that could rehabilitate and save Greg Oden's career, I would say Phoenix would be in the leader of the clubhouse. If you were running Phoenix at this point, would you think about Oden?
No question. But Marv Albert asked me that on the air when we were in Portland 2 weeks ago. Would you take a chance on Oden? Absolutely, particularly if you have a good training staff. And sometimes it's just a change of scenery. But you look at the history of the league, and there are guys like Zydrunas Ilgauskas who everybody thought was done with all the foot injuries, and he came back, and whatever he did differently, it worked, and he became an all-star. And, Grant Hill, right there in Phoenix, the last few years has been fantastic after everybody thought he was done. So, you particularly with a guy like Oden, you have to take a chance, and somebody will, and the question is whether somebody's going to come in and throw big money at him, and then Portland would have a decision whether to match and all that. But he's only 22, so you gotta keep giving him opportunities for sure.
Well, for what you had going before you left last summer, Phoenix would have had the cap space going into next summer, and Oden is somebody who's a restricted free agent that you really could try to blow out of the water and put Portland in a position where there's. This Brandon Roy thing is really bad, and I just don't think they're gonna. I don't think they can match a giant Oden offer when they're already stuck with this Brandon Roy contract. I think yesterday I read in a thing that they can't even operate on Brandon Roy's knee anymore. Like there's nothing left to operate on, and it's just like his knee is what it is. This is the saddest story of the season, and it's been dwarfed by the Miami thing. This is a top 10 guy who. It's starting to look like it's not going to be the same. What did you hear when you were in Portland 2 weeks ago?
Well, that basically they knew about the knee situation before they gave him the extension, which was kind of shocking. I think the comment from I believe it was Larry Miller, the president, was that the Blazers just felt like because of what Brandon meant to the franchise, because he was the face of the franchise, and for what he had done, that he had earned that contract. And it's really, really nice. But if that's the case and he can't play at the level where he was for the next 4 or 5 years, then that contract will just be a noose around their neck. And it's just a shame. And Brandon Roy is one of my favorite players in the league. He's one of my favorite people. I mean, I don't know him that well, but just watching the way he carries himself, he's exactly what the league needs. He's just a great teammate and loves the game and passionate about it and wants to win. And it's a horrible story. It just and watching him, he's not the same right now. He's definitely struggling.
And you look at maybe the pivotal moment of this whole thing was in your playoff series against them last year. He had the operation to remove his meniscus. I think it was his meniscus, right?
Yeah, he came back 8 days later. Now, they said it was unrelated to the previous injury.
It felt fishy from the get-go.
It did. And Grant Hill, during that series, made a point of going to talk to Brandon and say, listen, be careful because you got your whole future ahead of you. And those are always really tricky situations, and I don't know what the medical situation was with the surgery, and so I wouldn't speculate on that, but I just think that it's just a sad story, and I hope that Brandon can come back and be the player that he's been the last few years. He's phenomenal.
At the same time, though, you look at what was going on in that Portland organization at the time, because I wrote this last spring. Like, you had this GM who, there were all kinds of rumors that they wanted to get rid of him, and there was a power play, the president trying to take over. You had the coach who was going into the last year of his contract. You had the owner who had really been irrational that last season and uncharacteristically getting involved when he usually wasn't as involved. And I don't feel like that decision was made from a position of strength. And they can say all they want that, we're bringing Roy back that soon. It didn't affect what's happening now. And it's really hard to believe. They rushed him back in 8 days.
Yeah.
And it's not like they were going to win the title. If they got by Phoenix, it's not like the Lakers were going to crush them.
Right.
So I just thought if I'm a Blazers fan, I would be so upset at how that was handled, because I just don't feel like they had his best interests at heart.
Yeah, when I was with the Spurs way back, the year after we won the title, I think we won the first one in '99. The next year, Duncan injured his knee late in the year and rehabbed it, and he was probably ready to go in the playoffs in our first round matchup. And Greg Popovich said, "You're not playing. I mean, your future is too important for you and for us, and we're just not taking any chance at all." And this was, probably a month after his surgery. And I think part of it was that Pop knew we weren't a championship team that year, and it probably wasn't worth the risk. I'm sure some of that was in his mind, but more than anything, it's about just establishing what's right for the player and how you want to be perceived as an organization.
Yeah.
And I think that was a critical point in the Spurs sort of becoming the Spurs, in terms of being the kind of the model franchise. Here's your superstar player. He's probably ready to go in the playoffs, and you know what? We're not going to do it. We're not going to place that kind of risk on you as a player. And other players around the league see that, and they appreciate that.
And, you look at what the Spurs were in 2000. Popovich was in a real position of strength because he just won the title. He's not going anywhere. The owner totally trusts Popovich, and they're able to collaborate and make a decision that's based not just in the long-term future of the team, because they know they'll both be there, but in Duncan's interest. I don't feel like that happened with the Portland situation. And I just think we're talking about Miami nonstop. I just did a Miami podcast yesterday for an hour, and meanwhile, here's a top 10 guy who's never going to be the same. And it's not being talked about at all. Are you surprised by the amount of Miami? I mean, I knew we'd have Miami hype, but are you surprised that every day it's the lead story and part of the interruption? Every day it's all we're talking about. When are we going to get tired of this?
It's a great question, and I don't know that we ever will. And I think some of it is just the new social media. Just the way everything works these days, it's so different from, 10, 15 years ago. And so there's this constant just pulse that is beating, that everybody is watching and paying attention to. And and there's so many media outlets that are covering all this stuff that it just never seems to end. And it's really unfair. I mean, it's unfair to Miami. I read Chris Broussard's column yesterday on ESPN.com, and I think Chris does a great job, and I like him, but what's happening now, if you read that article, there's not one quote from a player, a coach, or anybody in management for Miami. Every single quote is from a person close to the situation, a source with knowledge of the team, whatever. So who is that? I don't know, but I mean, you can kind of guess who it is, I guess. But the point is, that's kind of the way journalism is these days. Everybody writes these stories where there's a source close to the team, and there's all these quotes, and it's not. It just seems like the bar has been lowered. The journalistic integrity bar has been lowered big time, and it's across the board. I mean, again, it's not Chris. Everybody's doing this. And
well, but in Broussard's defense, because obviously he has connections in the LeBron camp because he was one of the people that during the free agency period was all over this.
Sure.
If someone from LeBron's camp comes to him and says, here's the deal, and gives him the quotes and sets him up, I mean, Chris has to write that.
He has to write it, and that's why I'm saying, that's why I'm trying to defend him while I make this argument against, kind of what's happening with our media, because he has to write it. Now, the first thing you think, I mean, that was my thought yesterday when I read it was, well, it sounds like it's coming from LeBron's people.
Yeah.
Well, LeBron needs to tell those guys to be quiet, because if he wants his team, to succeed, then everything needs to be kept in-house, but it just doesn't seem to work that way anymore. And that was one of the most frustrating things for me in Phoenix the last few years. Every day there was an article, quoting sources close to the organization. And,
right.
I was worried that, gosh, is it somebody on my staff? And it wasn't. It was, I'd talk to reporters and they'd say, well, sources these days can be a friend of the player. They can be a former teammate. Sources mean anybody these days, and it's almost impossible as an organization to control that stuff. And so what happens is, particularly with Miami, because of the focus, there's just going to be stories every day, and everybody's a source, and you can generate all kinds of issues and stories, and it's just never going to go away.
Well, talk about last spring, because you guys were playing great. And this exact situation happened. There was an Amari story, right, about he wanted an extension or he was unhappy, and you couldn't figure out where it came from.
Yeah, there were a lot of stories like that. There was on the day of the trade deadline, I turn on the TV and there's on the scroll, the crawl, whatever you call it, on the bottom of the
ticker.
The ticker. There's all these trade rumors about Amari. Supposedly we talked to this team and that team, and it's so hard as a general manager and as a coach to have to know that your player is seeing that. And yes, we were having discussions with teams, but the whole world knows about it. And how did they find out? And why is it being trumpeted? On the ticker. That's just the part of the challenge of running an organization these days, is that there's just all these sources and these leaks of information and so many different outlets for the information to be streamed to the public. It's just tough to deal with.
And you had that classic situation where right near the end of the deadline you talked about a trade with Houston and about Amari, and it was between you and Daryl, the Houston GM. And somehow it got out, and neither of you could figure out how it got out. And it's like, well, we only had, 8 people who knew about it on our end, and you only knew 8, and you guys trust each other. You're both good guys. And it's like, well, how the hell did this get out?
I know, and you start looking for bugs on the bottom of your desk. I mean, you start getting paranoid about this stuff, and it's really, really difficult. And it happens with the best organizations. I mean, it happens with everybody, and it's like I said, it's these days it's almost impossible to keep everything in house, and that's just part of the equation. It
seems like the Spurs are the best at, only maybe 3 people know what's going on. And Presti went to Oklahoma City, and he just, he stole that from them. Presti's in full secrecy mode all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the way you have to be.
Yeah, I suppose so. But then, there's a part of the job and the business where communication is huge too, and you need to be, especially if you're not a great team, you need to be projecting your team's image to the fans, and you need to be really open and transparent, and so you've got to draw that line.
You played with, you were lucky enough to play with Duncan. You were lucky enough to play with Michael Jordan post-baseball, when he was actually like a relatively fun person to be around for the most part. Would you have wanted to play with LeBron James?
Yeah. I mean, I would have loved to have played with LeBron, because he is an unselfish player. I mean, he does find people. You look at Eddie House and James Jones, and that's the role I played when I was playing. I mean, those guys are getting wide open shots from LeBron.
Yeah, you would have loved that.
Yeah, that would have been fun. But I do watch their team and see, kind of what a lot of people are seeing, which is just kind of a lack of an identity. And And it makes sense. I mean, they're searching. It's a brand new team. Everything was put together. I mean, it's a brand new team even for Wade. You know, it's always hard as a player to go to a new team, just new surroundings and new offense and all that stuff. It's almost like Wade has gone to a brand new team too, and the adjustment for him seems to have been maybe the most difficult out of the big three. So it's we're only 19 games in for Miami, and there's a long way to go, but they're clearly lacking an identity, and they've got to figure that out.
You're a body language guy, as am I, and I noticed I went to their first 2 games, and the body language I was just totally confused by, and it certainly has gotten better. In Dallas, it was almost toxic. I think you've done at least one of their games, right?
Yeah.
And you're doing Thursday.
Doing Thursday at Cleveland, which will be incredible. I can't wait for that. The atmosphere is going to be off the charts. But yeah, I did the opening night game in Boston.
And how'd you feel about the body language?
Not great, particularly Wade. And I think it makes sense. I mean, the biggest question mark coming into the season that everybody brought up was, whose ball is it? Whose team is it? And both those guys, LeBron and Wade, need the ball for sure. And when they're without the ball, neither one is a spot-up shooter. I mean, they're both, if you look at their three-point percentages, they're both really bad this year.
Yeah.
And so when the other guy doesn't have it, it just looks like, he's standing around. And that's why when I watch them, I think it's almost like they need to run a continuity style offense, like where there's a system, kind of the Utah, system or the triangle or some kind of a continuity, fluid offense where everybody's moving, passing, and cutting instead of kind of the traditional, thing that 25 teams in this league do, which is just run sets and, kind of my turn, your turn type stuff. And,
right.
But the problem is, for Eric Spoelstra, I mean, he grew up in this Miami organization. He was a video guy for Pat Riley. Everything he knows is from Pat Riley. And if you think of the Pat Riley style, after he left the Lakers, when Magic was really running the offense, his teams in New York and Miami have always been extremely defensive-oriented, very slow-paced, not real creative. They're going to just kind of pound you to death with defense and run a lot of kind of traditional sets. And so for Spoelstra, I mean, you're sitting here and this is what you've grown up with. Now you're faced with a situation where the personnel doesn't really fit that. You probably need to run more. But, I look at the stats, they're 28th in the league in field goal attempts at this point.
Yeah.
So they're not running. They're not really taking advantage of those athletes on the wings.
I thought that this had the potential to be the greatest Don Nelson team ever, even though he's not coaching anymore. But I was confused, even in training camp, when they were talking about, we know that defense wins championships and blah, 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 and we got to sublimate our egos and all the stuff they were saying, which all sounds great on paper, but it wasn't a good defensive team. They're too small, and Bosch isn't a good enough rebounder. And it just seemed like to me that if they were going to beat people, it was going to be, I hate to sound like an idiot, but just by outscoring. Whether this final score was 130 to 128 or 150 to 148, that they were always going to be able to score 2 more points. Instead, they went the other direction. They slowed things down. And as you said, it's a my turn, your turn offense.
Right.
I don't see it getting fixed. I don't think they have a chance this year. The way the system they have and the players that they have and how small they are, and even when Haslam comes back, I mean, people are making Haslam out like he's Dennis Rodman in '96. It's ridiculous. This guy would be an 11th man of the Celtics.
Right.
I just don't see it getting better. Am I crazy?
Well, I think it'll get better from the standpoint that they're going to win games. Their schedule's been tough, and if they play 3 bad teams in a row, they'll develop some confidence and they'll get better. But I don't think the mindset can change, and that's kind of what I'm talking about with Spoelstra and the Miami system that's been in place under Pat Riley for these last dozen years or however long he's been there. Because running is a mindset. It really is. I mean, you look at Phoenix, and obviously, Steve Nash is probably the best ever in terms of generating pace, but it really is a mindset. The Suns have never been a good rebounding team. They've never forced turnovers. So, it didn't come from the defensive end. It just came from the mindset that we are going to outscore you, we're going to push the ball down your throats. And Miami doesn't have that type of mentality as an organization, and I think that's part of their identity crisis right now. The players want to run. You know, they probably don't quite have the personnel at point guard and at center. I mean, they can use like a Varejao type guy to create some havoc, or a Lou Amundsen, or somebody like that to generate energy on the front line to create some fast break stuff. And they can probably use a point guard who's more used to running than Arroyo. So the personnel is not quite right, but ultimately the mentality is totally different. It's very defensive minded, and it just doesn't seem like they have figured out an identity at this point.
I got a great email last week from a guy that I haven't mentioned yet in a column or even on Twitter because I wanted to save it for you. So this is from Mark D. in Reading. He said that the clear and obvious precedent for this year's Miami's team that nobody is mentioning is the 95 Bulls team that got eliminated by Orlando when Jordan came back from baseball. And his point was that Pippen had established himself as the alpha dog creator of that team. Now Jordan comes back, but he's not quite Jordan because he still has his baseball body. And it's like, well, do we let him take over? Do we not? Then he scores 55 in MSG. Now there's a little bit of an alpha dog struggle, even though the chemistry was great. And then on top of it, you didn't really have the rebounding that you got with Rodman next year. You had Kukoc, who a little more similar to Chris Bosh than maybe we realize, kind of the 6'11 guy who's not really somebody you can count on for 15 rebounds. And you guys never kind of figured it out, and you lost to that Orlando team. Then the summer happens, you figure it out. Could that have happened here with Wade missing the training camp, where they're just discombobulated?
I think so. I think that's actually a really good analogy. That team, the two problems were rebounding. We had lost Horace Grant the previous year, and so we didn't have that rugged rebounder. And then Michael wasn't Michael. He wasn't himself. He only played the last 17 games, and he was up and down. He'd score 55 one night, and then he'd just look kind of lethargic the next night. He didn't have his legs underneath him. So the following year, the continuity was there. We get Rodman, you get the rebounder. I think that's an apt analogy with Miami because they clearly need to play together for a while to really feel comfortable, and they clearly need some personnel upgrades on the front line. So, and I've been saying it really from the beginning, where this whole thing gets really scary if you're the rest of the league is not this year. It's in a couple years when they're able to build this team and add to the personnel, and Boston and the Lakers are getting older, and now all of a sudden you're probably looking at the best team in the league. But at this point, it's a little ways off.
Do you know who the leading rebounder was on that 95 Bulls team?
Well, you mean before Rodman got there?
Yeah.
Was it Pippen?
Yeah, 8.1 for Pippen. Purdue pulled down the 6.7. And then Kukoc with 5.4. You weren't really helping out. You only had 1.5.
1.5.
Apparently you didn't realize your team needed rebounds. You stayed in the perimeter.
I was boxing everybody else out.
You're like Joel Anthony. That's what they say about Joel Anthony, what a good box outer he is. But I do think, you know this better than anybody. If your team's not solid, if you don't have that cohesion, and you're in a position where all of a sudden the tension mounts and you're going against a team that really wants to rip your heart out, and especially on the road, that's when things fall. And that's when things fall apart. And we saw that in Dallas on Saturday night. And I think we're going to see it in Cleveland in the game that you're doing on Thursday. I think Cleveland's going to kill them.
Well, it's going to be interesting. I don't know if they're capable of blowing them out, but just the energy of the crowd and the circumstances, I could absolutely see Cleveland winning the game. On the other hand, maybe this is exactly what Miami needs, is this game. Maybe this is something that helps them take the next step, really going into the Lions' Den and kind of getting past it. I'm sure that everybody's had this game circled on their calendar. I know I have. So if you're Miami, maybe you go in there and you get a big win and it kind of jumpstarts you. I don't know. But I do think what you said is really accurate, that when a team knows it has you, like Boston, they've already beaten Miami twice.
Yep.
Boston's rock solid. Miami's still trying to figure it out. So they have to stabilize themselves. But what's a little disheartening is, and what's difficult is just this whole media aspect that we've talked about. they haven't handled the spotlight very well. I mean, the sources that are coming out, if they are LeBron's people or whoever they are, that just can't happen. If they want that team to succeed, then the sources have to go away, and they've got to keep everything in house, and they've got to say all the right things, and they've got to forge ahead together and build that unity. But if there are going to be sources all year complaining about coaching and roles and all that, then it's just never going to work.
The team that doesn't obviously resemble this Miami situation, but you played on a team that was a little bit fragile, the 2001-2002 Jailblazers. Which,
a little fragile.
Which, if you had kept a journal, would have been one of the 5 greatest sports books of all time.
Would have been the basketball version of the Bronx Zoo, I think.
That team won 49 games and then went into round 1 against the Lakers and got massacred. Things fell apart pretty quickly and whatever. I mean, could that be where we're headed with this Heat team, where that anytime they go against a bigger team, not just the Cleveland game, but I thought the Celtics, that second game, you just got the feeling that every time the Celtics play them, they were going to beat them. And I think the Lakers are going to be the same way. I don't think when you're fragile and when you don't really know who you are, I just don't think you can beat really good teams.
Yeah, I agree, but I do think that if you play 7 bad teams in a row, which eventually they're going to, I mean, the East is, it's not great, and I think their schedule does soften up here the next couple of weeks. So, if you win 6 or 7 in a row, it does really affect your mentality and your confidence, and everybody starts saying good things, and they will be capable of turning things around. But the injuries have crushed them. Haslam and Miller were 2 key guys. And again, the personnel isn't where they need it to be ultimately for this team to win a title. So they are fighting a little bit of an uphill battle in that regard. But in the end, I still think they'll find momentum and win a lot of games and get a lot better.
See, I just don't see. Don't you feel like the Celtics and the Lakers? I thought the Celtics were really good in the 07-08 season, and they were one of the best defensive teams ever. But when they had Delonte back for those 2 games before he got hurt, it just seems like that team is so deep. And then you look at the Lakers, and they got Blake now, and they have Barnes coming off the bench, and Shannon Brown's giving them something that they've never had before, and Odom's playing out of his mind, and Gasol is statistically his best year ever, and really is starting to look like McHale. Like, it seems like this is a bad season for Miami just to be trying to do this.
Yeah, and I know you've talked about this before. I mean, I really underestimated what the Miami situation would do to Boston and L.A. in terms of motivation. Boston last year finishes 27-27 in their last 54 games. They looked old and broken down, and then they add Shaq and Jermaine O'Neal, and I'm thinking, man, this team's just older, and they're going to struggle in the regular season. And Lakers, with Kobe and the knee situation last year, I thought both teams would just kind of coast through the regular season. I didn't really probably factor in enough just the Miami motivation. I mean, I think both teams really have been helped by everybody talking about Miami, everybody predicting great things for Miami. I think the Lakers and the Celtics are both using it as a huge edge to help them through the regular season, and it's elevated their play for sure.
And I would argue that the Lakers needed it a little more than the Celtics, because the Celtics already had the motivation of they blew a Game 7 of the finals that they had a 14-point lead in. The Lakers had just won 2 in a row, and they're feeling great about themselves, and Kobe's got more titles than Shaq, and it just seemed like they were set up for the classic 50-win season, kind of like a little bit like what you had with the 98 Bulls. Just let's get by and let's take care of business in the playoffs, and it's not happening.
Yeah, and I think Mitch Kupchak deserves a lot of credit. I think Blake was kind of the unheralded signing of the off season. I think Matt Barnes has been huge for them, and then Shannon Brown. I mean, who could have predicted that he'd turn into this 3-point shooter? Give him credit. He's obviously spent a lot of time working on it. But those 3 guys give them so much energy off the bench.
Yeah. And
you have to have that in this league. I mean, if you don't have energy guys coming off the bench, over the course of the 82-game season, you're gonna struggle. And the Lakers have really built themselves a better team than the one they had a year ago.
Would you say that if you're coming off a title or two titles, it's actually crucial to go mix it up with one or two spots in your top 9 so it feels different? Like when you had Brian Williams before he came Bison Dele, when he showed up in February, that's really when the 97 Bulls took off.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think you have to shake it up. You got to keep things interesting. That's why I think Boston was right to sign Shaq. I mean, Shaq is always going to bring something interesting, just his personality in the locker room. And the Celtics are the perfect spot for him because he doesn't have to be the man, and he's, he can't be the man, actually. Even if he wants to be, he just can't because of what they already have.
Yeah, but I was thinking about you, though, because he had a good week last week statistically.
Yeah.
And that's when Shaq gets into trouble at this point of his career.
Be careful.
He's getting attention for the 22-point game. It's like, oh, God, here we go.
Right.
You had good Shaq and bad Shaq in Phoenix. Good Shaq, when he showed up in the trade, he was great. And, I still think if Duncan doesn't make that 3, I think he could have won that series. Then the next year, he started getting a lot of attention for his stats, and your team fell apart. Do you see him just being able to be a role player at this point?
I do now. His contract is up. I think part of it with us was that he was in the last year of his deal, and he wanted to get good numbers, like all players. I mean, everybody wants to have a good year in that last year and of their contracts, and have a little better negotiating power that summer. So he signed a 2-year deal with Boston. It's basically what the veterans exception. The biannual exception. It's not big money. He knows where he is. He's trying to win a title, and he's got a great group of teammates. So it's probably the ideal situation for him.
I was a little worried about him, but I do think he's been the opposite of what Rasheed did last year, which was Rasheed just set the tone for, come on, fellas, it doesn't matter to the playoffs, and jogging through games and doing all the stuff that it's hard to imagine one guy infecting a team like that, but I really feel like he did. Like he just set the bar for people not caring, and Shaq is really invested. Like Shaq's running the floor this year. It's unbelievable. I didn't even know he could run the floor, and he's totally bought in. I think he's a nice balance from what I'm hearing with my Celtics peeps and stuff. Like he's a really nice balance for Garnett, who's just such a psycho about every game.
So intense.
And Shaq gives him crap.
Yeah.
Hey Kevin, calm down.
Well, Shaq can be great that way. I mean, when he first came to Phoenix, his attitude was fantastic. The enthusiasm in the locker room really was good for us, and you factor that in with Boston, and then the fact that Rondo is playing at the level he is, and Garnett looks better physically. That team, barring injury, it sure looks like they're going to run away with the East. Orlando doesn't look quite as good as they've been the last couple of years, and where Miami is, they're not good enough right now. Chicago's playing very well. It'll be fun to see them with Boozer, but it sure looks like Boston's year in the East. I
really like that Chicago team because I think when Boozer comes back, they now have 6 guys that you can go to war with in a playoff series. They got Rose and Noah. They have Boozer. They have Taj Gibson, who's been a revelation this year. They got Korver, who at the very least is somebody who could play 25 minutes in a big playoff game. And I'm forgetting somebody. Oh, dang.
Yeah.
There's 6 guys. You need 8. They're 75% of the way there, and they had Noah, I think, is especially against that Miami team. I think he's going to eat them up.
And they have a plan. I mean, there's no question who they are and what they are. It's a very defensive-minded team that's going to compete every night. I think Thibodeau's done an incredible job there. He's earned that job. He's been in this league for so long. He's put so much work in, and he's immediately put his stamp on that team. And it was the perfect personnel for his style,
right.
for what he's trying to accomplish. The one thing they're lacking is kind of a Jason Richardson type 2-guard who can drain threes and doesn't need the ball. And Korver's filling that role right now, and he's doing a good job. I know they signed Brewer to help out in that role as well, but they don't have the floor spacing at the 2 spot all game long that you need, I think, particularly in playoff games. That's the one weakness with that club, but I love everything else about them.
Brewer is the spot that they need to fix, because if they can upgrade that, and it's hard because they don't really have the contracts to to make a big move. Like, for instance, Richardson, I think he's making like $14 million. I think it would be tough to patch together.
And I just threw that name out there because of my familiarity with him. But the thing when you've got a point guard like Derrick Rose, you don't want to throw a guy like Brandon Roy next to him, who needs the ball in his hands and is a little bit of a ball stopper and a playmaker. You just want a catch up, a catch and shoot spot up guy who can run and score. And I mean, Jason Richardson that's why Richardson's been perfect for Nash. I mean, Nash makes the play, Richardson catches, the shot's going up. There's no messing around. So the flow continues, the pace continues. And I think that's probably Chicago's next step, as they evolve as an organization.
Former point guard Steve Kerr ranked the top 5 point guards right now.
Man, is that tough?
It's one of the toughest questions ever, right?
It is. It's a golden age for point guards. I mean, Westbrook might be the best one of all right now, the way he's playing. I don't know if you saw the fourth quarter last night. Completely took over that game, and he's making threes, and he's defending. And
I think he's an MVP candidate.
He is.
I think he's been the best player in that team. I love Oklahoma City's watch just because of Durant, so I watch a lot of their games, and he's been their best player. It's not even close.
Just think of the West. I mean, in terms of point guards, Chris Paul, Darren Williams, Westbrook, Nash. That's 4 right there. And now we're talking. You go to the East. You got Rose. You got John Wall, who's not there yet, but it's probably a year or 2 away.
You got Rose and Rondo.
Rondo is incredible. I mean, I don't think I could name a top 5. I think there's kind of a top 7, and I don't really know how to rank them. I'd take any one of them.
I think Williams has the conch, to use a Lord of the Flies term. I think he's got the conch right now because he really beat up on Paul when they went head-to-head a few days ago. And I saw Paul in person last week. I was pretty concerned about that giant knee brace he had.
Yeah, and he's had the knee stuff, but look at what his return has meant to that team.
Yeah.
I've always been a little bit more of a Williams fan than Paul, just because of the shooting range and the size. He's a much bigger kid than Chris.
Yeah.
With that said, I mean, Paul is phenomenal, and I love him too. But Westbrook is, I mean, all these guys. It's just an amazing era for point guards. The size, speed, athleticism, and they're all great guys too, great teammates, which is so encouraging for the league. The more guys you get like that, the more competitive everything gets. The better image the league has, the more people are going to want to watch. It's really great.
The one thing I didn't expect was Westbrook, because it just seemed after the Team USA thing and all the hype that Durant was getting deserved and how he played last year, it was Durant's team. In the last 3 minutes, you go to Durant. He's one of the best closers in the league. And yet when I watch them play and they go to Durant, it almost feels like, man, you should just clear it out for Westbrook. They can't stop him.
Should have gone to Westbrook.
Yeah.
Well, the thing with Westbrook is that he attacks the rim. Seems to me Durant settles a little bit too much for jump shots at the end of games. And that's his comfort zone, and he can shoot over the top of everybody, and he's such a good shooter. It makes sense, but Westbrook puts the defense on its heels and gets to the rim and gets fouled. So, I mean, how about that, having those two guys to close games with you? And both great guys. Neither one's going to be a problem ego-wise, so they can trade off and do their thing, and everybody's going to be happy. So that's a pretty scary situation there.
They did fit you have that thing about the young team that starts getting smoke blown up their butts. Might be sometimes not a great thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to Sam Presti this summer, and his whole thing was, we're not ready, we're not ready, we're not ready. He was trying to tell the world that, look, everybody's expectations are too high, and we've got to remember why we're here and how we got here. And he was exactly right. They started off slowly, and their defense wasn't nearly as good as it was a year ago, and it's kind of what happens with young players. But I admire what they've done, as a franchise, to kind of temper the expectations, but also to continually remind themselves of why they're good. And it looks like they're getting back on track a little bit. They're just, they're not ready to win a title, but it is a process. And within a couple of years, I think they'll be right up there.
See, I argued about this with myself in a column 2 weeks ago. I think they are ready. Durant is a top 5 player, and Westbrook is in the top 12 or 15 at this point. If you have 2 of the top 15 players, you're ready.
Well, they're not perfect. I mean, they don't have a low post guy on the block that they can go to, which is I think a glaring hole for them. And they're a little bit undersized. I mean, they like to play Ibaka at center, which is great with his speed and quickness, but they are susceptible, I think, to bigger teams that can pound them, like the Lakers did a little bit with Gasol last year. But
or like Roy Hibbert on Friday night.
Yeah.
And they did something really interesting. They went super small, which I had been dying for them to do all year.
Mm-hmm.
And they played Green at center, put him on Hibbert with basically Green and Durant as the 4-5. And they turned the game around. It made me wonder, like, from what we saw with Durant and Team USA last year, maybe that's not the worst option for them.
Well, with those 3 guys, Green, Durant, and Westbrook, you've got guys who can guard multiple positions and switch, and they've got speed and athleticism. I love that type of lineup where you can just kind of, be a hybrid team and run past people and create all kinds of mismatches.
Hey, if you were running Orlando and Washington called you and said, we'll give you Gilbert Arenas straight up for Vince Carter, would you do it?
I wouldn't do it. I think there's just too much risk because of the injuries, because of the contract, just because of the uncertainty with Arenas. And, being an Arizona guy, I mean, I'm gonna back Gilbert and I'm gonna go to bat for him and all that, but being a former GM, you look at that contract and it's so intimidating. I think he's making 22 3 years from now. If it doesn't work, you're just kind of done. Although, you're tied up anyway with all the contracts that you have. That
would be the counter argument, is that you don't have cap space anyway. You're not going to have cap space for 3 years. At the very least, you may be calling off for them Rashard Lewis's terrible contract.
That's the one that's tough to swallow. I think Vince's comes off this year. It's got a small guarantee for next year, I believe. Maybe a $3 million guarantee, something like that. But the Rashard one that's tough. I mean, he's making superstar money and he's a nice player, but he's not worth that kind of money.
And he's slipped a little bit. So I think since the 2009 finals, I just don't think he's been the same guy.
And Orlando's made a point of trying to get him on the block. I talked to Stan Van Gundy early in the year when we did a game in Orlando, and they really want to be able to when they play the Celtics, for example, they want to be able to put Rashard down on the block and post up Pierce or Allen or whoever's guarding him. And they're working on that, and they're trying to get him back to that spot. Because remember, he used to be a great post-up player with Seattle.
Yeah.
But he's kind of just become a spot-up shooter. And when Boston plays against Orlando, if he's just a spot-up shooter, then he's not really impacting the game. They took him completely out of the game last year, out of that whole series, because they wouldn't double Dwight Howard, and they'd just keep a guy on him on the perimeter, and he never had any open looks.
How many teams can win the title?
Well, obviously you have to factor in injuries, and you never know how that's going to work. But at this point, I'd say in the West, the Spurs, the Lakers, and I'm going to throw Dallas in there. I didn't like Dallas at the beginning of the year, but the impact that Tyson Chandler has had is remarkable. Their defense is so much better now. I think you have to throw Dallas up there.
Well, because you feel like they'll make a trade. They always make a trade in February.
They always do.
So offensively, they'll be a little better than they are right now.
But the trade could hurt them too. You never know. I mean, they're going to be aggressive, but that could hurt them or help them. We'll see. But I just like what Chandler's done. So I think you have to give them a chance. If the Lakers don't have any injuries, they're the only team that's going to come out of the West. But if there's any chinks in the armor, then I think San Antonio and Dallas are possibilities. And then in the East, I think it's the Celtics, Orlando.
Really, Orlando?
Yeah, only if Boston runs into problems with injuries, and they could. They did a year ago. They had that horrible finish to the year, and it kind of fell apart a little bit before gathering themselves. But I'd still throw Orlando in there just because of they're good defensively, and Dwight Howard is Dwight Howard. He's against everybody but Boston. I mean, he draws those double teams and he gives all those 3-point shooters room, and they're good enough to sneak in if something happens to Boston.
No chance on Oklahoma City, huh?
I don't think so at this point. I still think they're a year away.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to play them as like, a 4-5 seed where they're the 5 seed.
I wouldn't want to either.
I wouldn't want to play them in any series, actually, and I still feel like they really could have beaten LA last year. They weren't that far away.
They're scary. I'm trying to buy into the Sam Presti company line, which is we're not ready yet. So
God, he brainwashes everybody.
I'm doing this for Sam.
All right, well, wear a bulletproof vest in Cleveland because I don't know what the hell's going to happen on Thursday.
I played in Cleveland for 3.5 years, and I remember I went to a Browns-Denver game, and I remember the people in the dog pound throwing batteries at Elway when they were at their own 1-yard line. And the officials actually made Denver go to the other side of the field, away from the dog pound. It was the only time I've ever seen this in the NFL.
Wow.
They shifted sides of the field, which ultimately factored into the game because somebody hit a game-winning field goal for Cleveland, like into the wind when they should have been going, or with the wind when they should have been going into the wind, something like that.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring the story up is Cleveland fans are passionate. They're a little nuts, and I just, I hope that nothing crazy happens, but you better believe they're going to be ready for LeBron's return, and it's going to be an incredible atmosphere. I can't wait.
Crazy, passionate, and wounded. It's a bad three
combination.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, there are 2 times in the Garden. Liam Beer came in right after he almost paralyzed Bird, and then Sampson came in after he started the fight with Seachting. And those were the 2 times where you could feel the poison in the air, and both times it affected the other team. That Detroit handled it better than Houston. Sampson checked out in the Houston thing.
Yeah,
I don't think LeBron. I don't think Jordan would just go into FU mode, and he would welcome it. And I think Bird would have loved it, and I think even Magic would have loved it. I don't know if LeBron's going to like it.
I think he's going to use it. I think he's going to use it as motivation, and I really do. I think he's probably fed up with all the criticism and all the chatter and everything else. I think he's going to go nuts on Thursday night and absolutely bring it.
Well, can we at least agree that Chris Bosh is going to be good? This is the biggest game he's ever played in by far.
He may not touch the ball. I think LeBron is going to go. He's going to attack the rim all night.
Wow! So you think this could be like a career-defining game for LeBron James?
I just have a feeling. I mean, if you're Miami, if you're in that locker room, you got to be so sick of all this stuff and all the chatter and all the talk. And if you're LeBron, everybody's been talking about you since the moment you went on TV and announced what you were doing. I just think there's going to be some anger on his side, and I think he's going to be ready to play. And it's whether that's enough, we'll see. But it should be a good game. The Cavs are actually playing pretty well, and they're going to have their fans behind them, and it is going to be wild. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm predicting a 24 rebound game for Verjao. That's my one prediction. I think he goes insane in this game.
I could see it. I could see he's. I mean, it's a good matchup for him. Miami's not a good rebounding team, and Verjao is pure energy, so he should have a big night.
Steve Kerr, TNT, Thursday night, 8 o'clock. What a game this is going to be. Enjoy yourself. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bill.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at PodCenter at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.
We've got some big news, so if you're currently standing, please sit down. Get comfortable. You ready? Okay, here you go. The Chicken Marinara Melt is back at Subway. That's right, this Meltastic number is back as the latest $5 foot-long sub. Oh, mercy. Tender chicken and marinara sauce under a blanket of bubbly melted cheese on fresh toasted bread. Breathe deep. Stay focused. If you got a paper bag, please breathe into it, because the $5 foot-long Chicken Marinara Melt. This delicious deal won't last long, so get your hands on one today. Just don't stand up too quickly. With such overwhelming good news, you're lucky you're still conscious, so don't push it. Subway Melts. Melted goodness made irresistibly delicious. Subway. Eat fresh.